Hello and welcome to the Muni Creditcast. I'm Mike Stanton from BAM Mutual, and welcome to Episode 7, Taking Flight. Airport bond issuance has surged this year, putting a new spotlight on a very diverse sector. We're going to be joined today by my co-host, BAM Chief Credit Officer Suzanne Finnegan, and Kevin Roberts, who leads BAM's National Airports practice. Please turn your volume to a comfortable and locked position, make sure your AirPods are fully secured, and stay tuned for Episode 7 of the Muni Creditcast. Suzanne, I think airports are the most fun topic we've addressed so far on the podcast. They can house inspiring architecture. They're the site of these incredible human interest stories when families get back together. And there's a lot of good, but not good for you food. At the end of the day, when you look at the role airports play in American society and the U.S. economy, it's hard to avoid the word essential. And I bring that up because essentiality is one of the core things you're typically looking for in a credit. Bonds for essential projects tend to get paid. But is that enough for airport analysis? Because in this sector, being essential doesn't necessarily guarantee stable revenues. What are some of the things you think about in terms of what can interfere with airport revenues?
Thanks, Mike. There are a number of potential events which could impact airline and airport revenues. And we've seen a number of events that have occurred in the recent past that have actually impacted airline and airport revenues. And that includes things like the 9/11 scenario, where we actually had a number of airports in the country, well, all airports closed for a number of days, and then some airports did not reopen for a significant period of time. We also had the Great Recession, which impacted both discretionary travel as well as business travel. And then finally, we have our most recent example, which is COVID, and we've seen how that impacted airports.
So how much of your analysis is ultimately about stress testing those revenue streams to see what they can withstand and still keep paying bondholders?
It's a significant part of our analysis. We did have to re-examine the stress tests that we were using. I think Kevin's going to talk about that a little bit in detail. But we did have to take a step back and look at our extreme test, which we modeled off what really actually happened in COVID, and think about how that is relevant going forward and how it should be adjusted for the different facts and circumstances of individual airports. The other thing that we think about, besides stress testing, a big part of our analysis is looking at competition. And so for many of the major airports, competition is not as much of a factor. However, if you're looking at a smaller regional airport, they could see significant competition from a larger airport that has much more to offer.
And I think that's a great transition to bring Kevin into the conversation. Kevin's kind of at the knife face in actually analyzing these airports and putting the information together that you need to make your judgments. So let's go ahead and bring him into the conversation. So Kevin, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the Muni Creditcast. As you may have heard, the motto for our podcast is...
All right. If you've seen one muni bond, you've seen one muni bond.
Right. And one of the ways I think about how that applies to this discussion is the fact that BAM's credit guidelines separate out airports into multiple categories. So let's start with some of those definitions. How many different types of airports are there, and how does BAM split them out?
Sure. So, we definitely, look at different designations based off of size. And so, we have small hub and regional airports. as well as medium hub and large hub. And those are really based off of FAA designations, which is driven by the proportion of employments at each of those airports relative to the overall U.S. air travel market. So those are the three broad categories that we use to label airports.
And when you talk about hub airports, you start to think about, Chicago O'Hare, Atlanta, these places where people are coming in and connecting all the time. But that's not necessarily the guideline, right? You have other distinctions between the types of traffic you're looking at, right?
Sure. So, you definitely have, large connecting hubs, like you mentioned, O'Hare. But they're, really two different types of airports. So you have connecting hubs and then O&D airports, which is really origin and destination, which is kind of takes out that connecting piece, and it's more specific to passengers that are, basing their flight from a destination and landing at another airport.
So before we take too far a deep dive into the credit analysis, I just want to take a step back and note, as we mentioned, there's been this flood of airport bond sales this year, really across the country. What's behind that, and is that a one-time surge, or is that a new normal that we're going to see for a few years?
Yeah, it's definitely been a good year for airport issuance. It's kept us very busy, and I think there's a few drivers for that surge in volume. The first, I think, is really the emergence from the COVID period. I think when COVID hit, a lot of management teams at airports, put a pause on certain projects as they started to navigate the uncharted waters that came with, the pandemic. And now, I think as we emerge from that period and COVID money, federal aid has exhausted, projects are starting to reignite, and management teams are moving forward with those projects. And then, beyond that, I think there's just a real need for investment. There's a lot of airport infrastructure projects out there. The ACINA, which is, the Airports Council International in North America, put out a piece that's suggesting there's, about $150 billion in capital investment needed over the next 5 years. And so I think there's just a lot of facilities out there that need, upgrades, and that could be anywhere from, terminals, security systems, more efficient parking garages, rental car facilities. There's just a lot of projects that are needed out there.
And this is a really good example of something that our boss, BAM CEO Sean McCarthy, talks about a lot, which is that one of the obstacles to infrastructure investment in the U.S. is not about access to capital. The municipal bond market in particular is really liquid and really deep in terms of financing projects. It's about the ability to pay for those projects. And what's a little bit unique in this sector is airports have these built-in revenue streams. So this is really a very abject example of his theory at work. And that when the revenue streams are present and the need is there, projects get financed and we can upgrade infrastructure in the U.S. So it's kind of a good story as well. So let's get a bit deeper into the credit analysis. Obviously, one of the ways airports are different from each other is the economy of the service area. Different communities have different wherewithal, ability to pay. So let's start at the very beginning. How do you define the service area? Is it just a matter of looking at a map and drawing a circle around the airport with a certain diameter?
Yeah, not quite. I think the service area, it's the primary geographic location, whereby an airport derives its passengers. So those boundaries can change based off of its location and nearby competition. That could be much smaller if there's, a lot of competition nearby. But if an airport's, more remote and there's no competition, that practical driving distance where its passengers might need to drive for commercial airport service, it might be a little bit larger. So it's not a one size fits all approach to a service area. It really depends on a number of factors.
Can you give us some insight, just round numbers? Is there a range? What's a small service area? What's a large service area?
Sure. So I think what is pretty typical. You're looking between 90 minutes and 2 hours is kind of a general guideline as to where people will drive to reach a commercial service airport. But it really depends on the availability of options.
So then once you have the service area, the next step I think is to start gathering the economic demographic data, understanding, the strength of the community. What kind of indicators are you looking at? What kind of data comes in there?
Yeah, so I think it boils down to, the airport can't operate without the passengers. So we look at the number of enplanements, and that is really a function of the ability of passengers within that service area to travel, afford flights in and out of that airport and support the ongoing operations, for that airport over a 20 or 30 year term, which is the life of the bond. So we look at a number of factors, the size of the population, the population trends, whether it's a larger growing populace compared to a smaller and depleting population. We look at income levels, purchasing power, ability to, travel and discretionary income. And then we look at, certain factors like age distribution and, the likelihood of the populace to travel.
That's a great point. And, one of the things we haven't talked a lot about is, you do have this, an airport is kind of a public-private partnership, right? The airport is typically owned by a public center entity here in the U.S., but, you also have these private airlines that use it, and ultimately the revenues rely on the airlines being there. How do you look at airlines in your credit analysis?
Yeah, so, we are really looking at the underlying service area. So, we pay attention to airline concentration, but we really focus on the ability of the service area and the potential passengers' ability to support operations. We feel that if the underlying economic pinnings of an airport are strong enough, that the airlines, despite their potential corporate issues, will fill any potential void that arises, and so that's where we really focus. We pay attention to any potential concentration, but we're really looking at the underlying pinnings of the service area for any airport.
If people want to travel, someone will make sure they can.
Exactly.
So let's go back to we did get this real life stress test in the very recent history in terms of the COVID pandemic. Ultimately, the sector seems to have emerged pretty well. So I'm going to ask both of you this question, but Kevin, let's start with you. What are some of the things that went right?
Yeah, so I think it's important to realize, leading up to the COVID period, credit quality at airports was generally pretty strong. The economy was in good shape. A lot of airports at that time had seen record levels of enplanements. So I think the airports had done a good job, and then the management teams had done a good job of, building really strong balance sheets. So I think, the availability of liquidity and the status of the credits was very strong. During the COVID period, they received a lot of federal aid, which helped them maintain that credit quality coming out of the COVID period. But I think that, the amount of money that was infused into airports across the country was also telling. It demonstrated the essentiality of the airports to the American economy and, our way of life. And then, I think the last thing that, big topic that we can kind of learn is just the resiliency of the sector. There was a very quick and pronounced bounce back. Once people were able to travel, they did travel. And, we're 4 years past the COVID period. And, as of 2023, most airports were almost entirely recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And, the ones that aren't there are, very close and should reach those levels within the next year or so.
It's a really interesting point because, in the commercial real estate sector, and maybe that'll be a future topic for the podcast, you're still seeing places where people are not back in the office, but they are back on the planes, right? And so that it is, again, the testament to the granular analysis that you need to do in this marketplace. Suzanne, you started to talk about this a little bit earlier, but what lessons have you drawn from COVID? Did you have to? What kind of changes have you made to BAM's credit analysis policies?
Well, one thing I did just want to echo what Kevin was talking about. I do think a big part of this sector, especially the airports that BAM is focused on, it does speak really to the quality of the management teams at these airports. The fact that they came into the COVID pandemic with so much cash, and as Kevin pointed out, good balance sheet management, I think that's an important factor that we look at in this sector. Interestingly, there were some airports during COVID who took advantage of the fact that terminals were largely empty, and they were able to move forward pretty efficiently and undertake projects that were slated for later dates, but took that opportunity and got some work done actually during the pandemic. And so again, I think the quality of the management in this sector is an important and positive factor. We did look at a variety of different kinds of stress tests, and we applied it not just to airports, but to other sectors that we were originally concerned could be impacted by COVID, things like sales tax revenue bonds, convention center deals, things of that sort. And so we impose a much more stringent stress test in terms of the declines, and we have a recovery period that's a little bit longer than we had used previously. But from our core underwriting standards, we really didn't make any changes. I think our criteria and standards are very conservative, and they served us well, as that we had no problems or difficulties in the portfolio during COVID.
That's great. So before we wind up, I would love to just kind of put you both on the spot and ask one more question, which is, when you take a look at this sector, unlike some other sectors, there can be a lot of change in the future, right? There's a lot of technology out here that may change things. Technology is not going to revolutionize how water is delivered to homes, but it could revolutionize how we travel. How do you think about that? How do you think about that long-term potential for disruption?
I think the availability of technology, could potentially serve to enhance airport operations. I think when you look at the projects that are being built and financed within the airport space, a lot of it is about modernization. It's become sort of an experience at airports that's been, a big driver for these projects. And so you include this technological change, and you'll find efficiencies, operational expense efficiencies. So I think it can be a good thing for these airports to really continue to stabilize their operations, but improve their operations and continue to generate even stronger cash flows.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also add that these technology improvements are not going to replace airports and airlines and enplanements. So those core factors are still going to be there. It's not going to be quite as disruptive as, say, driverless cars and the impact they have or could have, depending on your location. So I think it circles right back, Mike, to essentiality. And I think Kevin's 100% right that this is all about enhancing and improving, not about changing the delivery.
And of course, the quality of management teams. That goes back, it kind of goes without saying that the ability to respond, the ability to take advantage of that really relies on management. As we've talked about, that tends to be strong here in this sector. Well, thank you both for joining us today, and thanks to everyone for listening. We really appreciate the time from Suzanne Finnegan and Kevin Roberts on this month's episode of the Muni Creditcast. As a reminder, there's a new Muni Creditcast on the last Wednesday every month, so subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. BAM Mutual is rated AA with a stable outlook by S&P Global Ratings, and we insure more than $100 billion of municipal bonds from across the U.S. Every BAM-insured bond carries that AA stable rating. For more information or any questions from our podcast, please email us at creditinsights@buildamerica.com, and Suzanne and I will try to address your questions on future episodes in our mailbag segment. Thanks again.